Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you are all well on this fabulous, what starts with an M? Marvellous Monday. What else is marvellous? You're marvellous. You're looking marvellous today, and I can tell that you are going to have a marvellous week, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed for it. But anyway, what are we talking about this morning? We're talking about alibis, because there's a lot of people who still chat about Brian Kohberger and his alibi or lack thereof. We did some videos over the last few days and spurned a lot of Brian Kohberger's guilt supporters, which I understand. I do fully understand. The thing and I constantly say the same thing, and that is that when people kind of try and argue the point, and the point that they're trying to make doesn't really factor into the equation in reality, because they've either made it up based on their interpretation of the evidence, or they're basing it on News Nation, Dateline, so on and so forth, and things that, again, just haven't been validated in any way, shape or form. Even people who read the PCA seemingly fail to understand that the PCA is an interpretation of evidence that law enforcement have come across, and that hasn't been validated or proven yet, not in the public eye. Okay, but in terms of alibis, I just want to point something out, and I think it's important for us to just step back for a second, because some people will turn around and say, you talk about, like, the frat boys, for instance, and they will turn around and say, I don't know how many more times I want to say that Brian Kohberger may indeed be innocent. You want to support Brian's innocent. No, I just want to support his constitutional rights as an individual accused of a heinous crime, and make sure that if he is going to be convicted and executed, then he did it. That's it. But what they'll turn around and say, but then you will point a finger at the frat brothers and say, well, there's a potential that they did, with absolutely no evidence whatsoever. Let me just say something. It's not for us, and JB Gunner said this the other day, it's not for us to prove anybody's guilty. Not at all. But it is up for debate, certain elements of this case. Like, we could turn around and say, at the moment, we've got the evidence put before us that, you know, that some people have convicted Brian over already, and some people can clearly see that evidence is circumstantial, which would be no different than saying Ethan Chapin had gone to a party with Xana, and that ended up in a fight. There was an argument. And it was bad enough that they would leave. And it was bad enough that Xana's family or a family member was due to drive and at the last minute decided against it. But they were going to drive over to check in and make sure things are okay. But that fight was, obviously, it was bad enough. It's bad enough. And you pair that with other things that have been said on the night, like the communication between the other girls, Maddie and Kaylee, and saying, what did you tell Jack, and all this, so on and so forth. And then a few hours later, they're deceased. All of these little things could be circumstantial evidence had Brian Kohberger never been sort of pinned for this crime. Do you know what I mean? There's little things like this fight. People would, by now, be looking at a potential connection to the fights, the arguments that happened on that night. They would. And when you look historically at how these Greek systems, the fraternities and the sororities operate, they operate primarily on secrecy and money protecting money. That's just the way it is. It's the way it always has been. There's other crimes that I spoke about the week before last, I believe, where people had gone to a party and vanished off the face of the planet, and everybody then loses the ability to speak. And, you know, and it's one of them where somebody must know something. And in the Idaho 4 situation, nobody's saying anything. The entire town, the entire populace of this area has decided to clam up shut. And that generally tells you something about the area as a whole. And that is that they don't like talking. And is it because they're scared of something? Is it because they've been warned of something? Who knows? And that's just something that we'll have to speculate on. But in terms of alibi, I want you guys to let me know down below what you think everybody else's alibi would be. Brian Kohberger has gone into law enforcement and said that he's likely driving around this area. He doesn't have any witnesses. It's just something that he does. He's a night owl, can't sleep, gets in his car and drives around, which pretty much fucked him over. But then you've got a situation where I think, well, what was everybody else's alibi? If they were at parties and they were out drinking and they were with friends and they were... What was the best? What was the best outcome of an alibi there? What? They stick up for each other? this frat member turns around and say, well, it couldn't be that frat member because that frat member was with me and we was with that frat member and that sorority member. We was all together and we'll all stick up for each other. What can they have beyond that? What could it be beyond that? Phone pings, perhaps. Phone pings locating them in Moscow, Idaho, with a tower that has a 20-plus mile radius, which puts them in the area of the crime. Well, we live here, so our phones are going to ping in this area. That is not an alibi. That's just, again, they live in the area. Their phones are going to ping. But was any of their phones off? Had any of them died from the busy day, the night out partying and drinking? Who knows? But I bet that there was more than one phone that was not pinging in Moscow, Idaho on the night of this crime. Not just Brian Koberg. Brian Koberger's wouldn't have been the only phone between Washington and Moscow that was switched off between the times of the murders. I would bet my bollocks to a barn dance on it. And again, we talk about Jack Showalter, we talk about Jack DeCure, and again, what were their alibis? Sleeping, and who would say that they were sleeping? A friend corroborating a story. Is that all it takes? Is that all it takes for a alibi to be absolutely solid? The same with the surviving roommates. What was their alibi? Could they actually ever have an alibi? If there was nobody pinned for this crime right now, like the knife sheath hadn't existed, the car hadn't been found because of that, and the chain of whatever happened, do you think that people would by now be considering potentially an inside job, the roommates? Is it just because Brian Koberger has this circumstantial evidence against him that now nothing else matters, nothing else should be considered? Again, I ask the question because, again, I would think, what is the alibi of the two surviving roommates? Can they just say that they were asleep? Like Grandis in the Summer Wells case. She was asleep, didn't see anything. She was in a trailer asleep. Well, then that makes you not guilty and no witness of absolutely anything. We won't have to question you at all. That is a default methodology of a criminal to just say I was asleep. It couldn't have been me. Do you know what I mean? I suppose what I'm getting at here is that I don't think, and I think it's safe to say that nobody around this case, none of the students who was or on the peripheral of these victims' lives in the hours before they died, genuinely has an alibi. And that is just my opinion. And if you'd like to argue that, please do downstairs. Keep it friendly. Don't be a prick about it. But just let me know what you do truly think that what differs between Brian Koberger's alibi and any of the alibis that any of these people could have given. What makes them different? Is it purely because you've seen evidence, circumstantial evidence against Brian Koberger, that you feel that is enough to warrant their alibis as good and solid? Solid. You're looking amazing. Still amazing. And I'll catch you all on the next one.